It was one of those dark, rainy evenings that seemed to last forever. I was in a small town for a business trip, and the only option for accommodation was a quaint old hotel. The lobby's dimly lit chandeliers barely pierced the gloom, and the antique furniture had seen better days. The night was meant to be uneventful. I checked in, got my room key from the elderly receptionist, and made my way to my assigned room on the third floor. My footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, and the creaking wooden floors added an eerie soundtrack to my journey. Once inside my room, I breathed a sigh of relief. It was cozy in a vintage way, with floral wallpaper and heavy curtains that kept the rain's incessant tapping at bay. I decided to order some room service and settled in for a quiet night. As I waited for my meal, I couldn't help but notice a faint, peculiar odor in the room. It was an earthy, damp smell, like the air was infused with a hint of decay. But I shrugged it off as an old building's quirk, perhaps the result of the heavy rain. My meal arrived, and I ate in solitude, accompanied only by the sound of the rain. The television, an ancient relic in the corner, offered no solace, only static and a few grainy channels. After finishing my meal, I decided to take a relaxing shower and retire early. As I stepped into the bathroom, my footsteps squelched on the cold tiles. It was then that I noticed the smell was stronger in there. I checked for any signs of mold or water damage, but found nothing. The steam from the shower seemed to intensify the strange odor, and I hurriedly washed up and got out. I settled into bed under the weight of the old-fashioned covers. The rain outside had grown into a steady downpour, its rhythm lulling me to sleep. Just as I was about to drift off, a faint noise from the room next door caught my attention. It was an unsettling scratching sound, almost like someone clawing at the wall. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the source. It was irregular, sporadic, and didn't sound like any noise a hotel guest should make. My curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed the old, creaky telephone and called the front desk to report the strange noise. The receptionist promised to send someone to investigate. Minutes passed, and the scratching continued. It was growing louder and more frantic, filling the room with a sense of foreboding. I was about to call the front desk again when I heard the receptionist's voice, muffled but alarmed, through the wall. She was talking to someone else, and their conversation sent a chill down my spine. They were discussing the room next to mine, saying that it should have been unoccupied during my stay. My heart raced as I realized the source of the noise was coming from an empty room. The footsteps of the receptionist and another person echoed in the hallway. The voices grew louder as they approached the room next door. The doorknob turned, and there was a loud, unmistakable gasp of shock. They had discovered something in that room, something that was not supposed to be there. I strained to hear, but their voices faded as they hurried back down the corridor, leaving a void of silence. Now alone in my room, dread enveloped me. What had they found? Why had they been so startled? The scratching in the room next door had stopped, but the smell was still there, growing more pungent by the minute. Torn between fear and curiosity, I made a decision. I had to know what was in that room. I grabbed my room key and carefully stepped out into the hallway. The oppressive silence weighed on me as I approached the door of the neighboring room. As I stood there, key trembling in my hand, I couldn't help but think about the musty smell, the strange noises, and the words of the receptionist. It was all leading to one horrifying possibility. With a deep breath, I inserted the key and slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open to reveal a scene that would forever haunt my nightmares. Inside, bathed in the dim glow of a single flickering light bulb, I saw an emaciated figure, a person, or what remained of one, trapped between life and death. A tangle of matted hair obscured their face, and their frail form was bound by tattered clothes. In the corner of the room, scratch marks covered the walls like a desperate plea for escape. The room was a prison, a nightmarish confinement for a soul long lost to the world. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back into the hallway, slamming the door shut. My mind raced, unable to comprehend the horrors I had just witnessed. I ran to the lobby and demanded an explanation from the receptionist. She was trembling as she told me the chilling story. The room had been sealed and unoccupied for years, ever since a tragedy took place within those walls. A previous guest had vanished, leaving behind only a cryptic message etched into the walls of their room, words that hinted at a malevolent presence. Tales of this room's cursed history had circulated among the staff, and it was meant to remain sealed and empty. Yet somehow it had been occupied by that tormented, wretched figure. The police were called, and the room was resealed. I couldn't get out of that hotel fast enough, leaving behind the haunting memories of a night I'd never forget. To this day, the image of the person in that room, trapped between life and death, and the endless scratching in the darkness, haunts my dreams. That night in the small hotel became my very own real-life horror story, forever etched in my memory.
It was supposed to be a romantic weekend getaway for my husband and me. We had checked into a charming old hotel tucked away in the countryside. The atmosphere was quaint, and the creaky wooden floors added to its rustic charm. Little did we know that our peaceful escape would turn into a nightmarish encounter with a man named Colin. The first night was uneventful. We enjoyed a candlelit dinner in the hotel's cozy dining room and retired to our room. The antique furnishings and dimly lit lamps created a serene atmosphere that helped us relax. But as the clock neared midnight, strange sounds began echoing through the hallways. Thumping footsteps, like heavy boots on the wooden floors, jolted us awake. At first, we thought it was just another guest returning late to their room. However, the footsteps grew louder and more erratic, echoing through the narrow hall. I nudged my husband, who was already tense and alert. "What is that?" I whispered, my heart pounding. He shook his head, equally mystified. The footsteps seemed to circle our room, sometimes growing faint, before returning with even more intensity. It was as if the intruder was intentionally trying to unnerve us. My husband cautiously approached the door, peeking through the peephole. What he saw chilled him to the bone. A tall man with disheveled hair and wild, darting eyes was pacing the hallway. It was Colin. He had a crazed look in his eyes, like a man on the brink of madness. Colin's disoriented behavior sent shivers down our spines, and it was clear that he was not in his right mind. My husband quickly locked the door, but that didn't calm our fear. Colin's menacing presence was overwhelming, and we had no idea why he was behaving this way. Had he become unhinged, or was he harboring some malevolent intent? We debated calling the hotel staff or the police, but the fear of provoking Colin and escalating the situation made us hesitant. Our room had no phone, and venturing into the hallway to find help seemed like an unimaginable risk. We huddled in the dimly lit room, our ears strained for any clues about Colin's movements. The footsteps continued for hours, a maddening dance of chaos just beyond our door. As the night dragged on, exhaustion and fear wore us down. We dozed off in fits and starts, only to be jolted awake by the strange sounds in the hallway. The hours passed like an eternity. When the dawn finally broke, the noises ceased. The hotel returned to its serene facade, as if the unsettling night had been nothing but a twisted dream. With the rising sun, we decided to finally seek out help. We reported the harrowing encounter to the hotel staff, who were just as perplexed as we were. They assured us that they had no guest by the name of Colin, and there was no record of such a guest ever staying at the hotel. We left the quaint inn with our nerves frayed and questions unanswered. To this day, we wonder who Colin was and what had driven him to haunt our night in such a terrifying manner.
A few years ago, I decided to travel to Japan, a place I had always dreamed of visiting. The journey had been incredible so far, exploring Tokyo's bustling streets and immersing myself in the rich culture. But one night, in a small, quaint hotel, my adventure took a terrifying turn. I had checked into the charming family-run hotel in a quiet neighborhood, seeking a more authentic experience. The elderly couple who ran the place were warm and welcoming, and I felt at ease. That night, I settled into my modest but cozy room, the soft glow of a lantern providing a comforting ambiance. Sleep eluded me, so I stayed up, reading and occasionally glancing out the window into the dark streets. Then, as the clock in my room struck midnight, a strange sound caught my attention. It was like a low, guttural moan, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. I dismissed it as my imagination, but then it came again, unmistakably from outside my window. I carefully drew the curtain aside and peered into the dimly lit alley below. There, under the flickering streetlight, stood a man. He was tall and thin, his silhouette barely discernible in the darkness. He wore a long, tattered coat, and his unkempt hair hung low over his face. The eerie moan had been coming from him, and he seemed to be in a state of distress. Fear surged within me, but I couldn't ignore the instinct to help. With a deep breath, I grabbed my coat and rushed down to the hotel's entrance, where the elderly couple was just locking up for the night. I explained what I had seen and the strange, unsettling sounds coming from the alley. The couple exchanged worried glances, and the husband nodded gravely. The wife told me to stay inside while they went to investigate. They had an air of concern and fear that sent shivers down my spine. As I waited anxiously in the hotel's lobby, time seemed to crawl by. Minutes felt like hours. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The elderly couple had been gone for too long. Finally, they returned, their faces pale and drawn. Their news shook me to my core. The man in the alley was a troubled soul, a drifter with a history of violence. He had been injured and was intoxicated, which had led to his disturbing wails. When they had approached him, he had turned aggressive, and they had barely managed to escape from his clutches. Now he was standing in the shadows of the alley, watching the hotel. The elderly couple had called the police, but they were taking their time to arrive. Fear gripped me, realizing that the man could return at any moment. We barricaded ourselves in the hotel, waiting in tense silence for the police to arrive. The minutes stretched into an eternity, and it felt like a lifetime had passed before we finally heard the sirens in the distance. As the police apprehended the man, his haunting, glassy eyes met mine for a brief moment. I shivered with dread as they took him away, wondering what might have happened if I had ventured into the alley alone. That night, sleep never came, and I left the hotel at the crack of dawn, thanking the elderly couple for their courage and protection. The chilling encounter haunted